Welcome. Wonderful to have you join us. And we are sort of at a mark, because we have finished all the Rashis on both Nitzavim Vayelech. I was looking this morning to see if we had any more Rashi to do on Vayelech, because we finished Nitzavim yesterday and discovered we have done it all. So I have gone back now to do Torah Temimah. So that's what we're going to look at this morning, and I'm going to set up the share in just a moment, but we'll start with the bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Thank you. So here we go. So we're at the beginning of Nitzavim, and we're going to be looking at this now this morning, Torah Temimah. So if you're interested in looking at the previous Rashis, then, just go to my YouTube site and type in Nitzavim, 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 and you should be able to find them all there. So, Atim Nitzavim Hayom Kulchem, you are assembled, all of you today, or you are assembled today, all of you, Lifnei Hashem Elokechem, before the Lord your God. Rashechem, your heads, Shiftechem, your tribes. We are going to look at that carefully. Ziknechem, your elders, Veshotrechem, and your officers. Kol Ish, every man, Yisrael of Israel. And of course, it goes on, Tabchem, Shechem, etc. So we're going to just look at this for now, at this first verse. And here we are. Rashechem, Shiftechem, Ziknechem. Right? It says heads, your tribes, and your elders. And of course, this Shiftechem seems very strange, because if it's your tribes, aren't Rashechem, your heads, included in your tribes? Aren't your elders included in your tribes? So what does he mean here? So this has been, we're going to discuss the meaning of that, and to understand, what does it really imply here? Is he just simply talking about your tribes? That seems impossible. So what other alternatives do we have? So let's move into this. Moshe hikdim rashim lezkenim. Moses preceded with the heads before the elders. And what's the problem with that? Well, we just see. We'll discuss that, right? So the heads of the tribes he precedes in the listing of people, and there's an implication of importance here, that first come is more important than, that's the order of respect. He's showing more respect to the heads of the tribes. And we'll define and clarify, what do we mean by the heads of the tribes, as opposed to the elders. Uve Yehoshua Kativ, and in comparison, we look at the book of Joshua, chapter 24, and it states, Vayikra Yehoshua lizkenav u'lerashav. Joshua called to his elders and to the heads, his heads. So, opposite, right? So why? Lefi shebemoshe, why? Because in the case of Moses, kulam hayu talmidav, all of these people were his students, all of them. Uveyoshua, but with Joshua, lo hayu kulam talmidav, they were not all his students, all his pupils. And we'll go into the Torah Temimah here. So there's the footnote. Skenim, so clarify, when we talk about the elders, Heim Talmidei Chachamim, we are talking about, literally it means the disciples of the wise, or wise disciples, probably disciples of the wise. And it would be a better translation. And of course, the idea is that a Talmid Chacham is someone who is learned in the Torah, deeply learned, and practices it too, and is actually the embodiment of Torah, right? Kemevu'ar lefanenu, as is explained or clarified before us, preceding, but Parshat Chaye, in the Parsha of Chaye Sarah, all the way back in Genesis. Ube Parshat, or maybe Pasuk, Ube Pasuk Avraham Zakein, right? And in the verse that talks about Abraham was Zakein, there's that word Zakein, and what do we mean by that in that context? And there it's clarified that it means he was a Talmid Chacham. Uyan Sham, which means V-Day, right? Check it out. Take a look. You'll see. For Rashim, how about the heads? Heim af she'enam talmidei chachamim. Well, we're including in these people, Rashim, the heads, even people who are not talmidei chachamim. They're not these learned people, students of the wise. Ach umdim, but umdim heim barosh hanagat hatzibur. But nevertheless, they still take a place at the head, in other words, in leading in the administration of the community, right? So there are obviously matters of consequence in terms of the administration of a community, and that don't necessarily require one to be a Talmid Chacham. And these are the people who are willing to take on the responsibilities. You might say it's like the president of the congregation. Does not need to be a learned Torah scholar, but needs to know the various qualities that go into being a good administrator. With Ritzono Lomar, and the point of this little comment that we've just had up above, de Moshe lo haya pechitat kvod lahaskenim, that with regards to Moses, there was not a diminution of respect for the elders, she'amdu achar harashim, in that they stood behind the heads. Ki belav hachi, because even without this, in other words, even without them coming, I believe what he's saying is that even if they don't come before the heads, kulam talmidim heim legabe Moshe, they would all be considered students, pupils in comparison to Moses. That he was just so brilliant. They all were his students. So he did not have to give additional respect to the Zakenim, right? The Adraba, and just the reverse, He mechuyavim bechavod uvemoreh. They were the ones who were required to show respect and fear, to honor, kavod would be honor, morah, fear, and I think definitely here it refers to respect, the nature of fear in this context. In other words, all these people, and especially the Zkenim, they themselves had to show Moses the morah, the kavod or morah that one normally is supposed to show Zkenim. And for this reason, mipnei oze tachlit shehaya Moshe, because there was an additional purpose, there was some special reason that Moses had lahakdim et haroshim, to precede the heads, kedemafaresh lo, as is going to be explained, lo chashash. So he wasn't worried lechavod haskenim, that he needed to show the skenim an additional layer of respect compared to the Rashim. This was not the case when it came to Joshua. Im haya, were he to, here we go, osechen, right? If he were to precede the Rashim to the Zkenim, right? Haya potchet bechvod haskenim. In that particular case, he would have shown disrespect. He would have lessened the honor due to the Zkenim, uvechovod Toratam, and by extension, honor to their learning, to their Torah, to the level of Torah that they had embodied. And for that reason, he needed to put them ahead of the heads of the community. So it's, interesting just, in sort of taking a moment here to compare what we're reading here to the Rashi, right? It's sort of an interesting exercise, that the nature of this, it's hard to actually pinpoint and to describe exactly the difference here. First of all, I mean, on a more obvious level, it's a different approach, right? Here he is, we haven't finished this entire quote that he is lifted from, and this is from the Talmud Yerushalmi in the tractate Horayot, chapter 3, halacha 5, okay? And what he's done is he's probably maybe edit the exact words. He isn't quoting verbatim from Yerushalmi, because part of his exercise is to try to present these additional words in the Talmud or other rabbinic sources, but to put them in a little bit more of a clearer manner than it might be found in the Yerushalmi itself. And then on top of that, he then has these copious footnotes where he goes into various issues and tries to point out and clarify apparent difficulties, as he just did. So, Davar Acher, another interpretation. Moshe, so there's I remember reading in the Steinsaltz once that when they give you an alternative explanation, it means the one explanation isn't good enough, right? That there's something lacking with the one explanation, because if the explanation were totally compelling, they wouldn't need to give you another one. So we're just approaching this in different ways, right? Davar Acher, another interpretation. Moshe lo hayat tzarich lezkenim bekibush haaretz. Moses was not going to need the elders regarding the conquest of the land. Hikdim Rashim, and for this reason he preceded the heads. In other words, Moses knew at this particular point that he was going to need these heads of the tribes to arrange they would be responsible for organizing the army and for maintaining, they would be his generals. And he needed, they weren't going to just walk in and take over. They were going to have to conquer the land of Israel. And the Zakanim were not the ones who were going to be charged with that responsibility, or possibly even capable of fulfilling that responsibility. And he knew this is the special level that and reason why he would have referred to the Rashim first. V'Yoshua tzarich lahem, and so, but Joshua, because he would have conquered the land and is going to need them in terms of then the fact that he wanted the people to be educated, that he wanted them to be educated in Torah, and that it would help in the actual living in peace and in prosperity in the land. The Zakanim would be the ones who were responsible for the promulgation of Torah. Hikdimam l'Rashim, and for that reason, he put the Zakanim before the Rashim. Davar Acher, another interpretation. Moshe, and this one, by the way, I have to think about, right? Moshe lo nityageya b'Torah. Now, exactly what this means is not so clear to me. Moshe did not become tired in Torah. Now, there is this concept that I'm familiar with, to the idea of studying the Torah, that we have a mitzvah on ourselves to study the Torah to a point where we become exhausted, that we put so much effort into our Torah study that we literally become mentally and even physically exhausted. And this is saying that Moses did not ever reach that point. I think that's what it means. It means that he was so tied up in the study of Torah, and maybe this is related to that first explanation where it talked about everyone being his student. Hikdim Rashim. He therefore put the heads ahead. And I'm sorry that there is no There is no Torah Temimah commentary on this because I'm not certain as to the point that's being made here, right? Why would that necessarily mean that he could put the Rashim first? Is it in some way saying that, well, let's just finish this, okay? But Joshua, who did become enervated, who did become exhausted in the study of Torah, for that reason, he put the Skanian first. And as I'm thinking about this and talking to you about it, it occurs to me that possibly, that the Zkanim, especially in reading about Joshua, that when Joshua himself became exhausted, he needed the Zkanim to help him at that point with his Torah study, that the Zkanim would have been an assistance to him at that point, whereas Moses never needed their assistance because he never got to a point where he was so exhausted in his Torah learning. And that, at this point, is the best clarification I can have of what's going on, because it explains why he wouldn't have needed the Skanim as much as the Rashim, Here, in that connection, again, with the Kibush Haaretz, etc., but at least on a lesser level. Davar Acher, another, you can see this is giving them a lot of food for thought here, because they're bothered, I think, by the fact that it says Rashim first and Skanim after that. Davar Acher, another interpretation. Lefi Shetzipa Moshe Baruch HaKodesh, because Moses foresaw through the divine spirit, he foresaw She'atidim Yisrael, that way in the future, Israel, I think it's lehisager b'malchuyot, that the Israelites would be delivered over to the other kingdoms. In other words, that they would be conquered and overpowered and subjugated to these other kingdoms. V'rashehem, and in that particular case, the heads of the community, omdim al gabehem, would stand above them. Lefichach, in other words, Torah Temimah is going to explain this a little bit further to us. But the idea, I think, was that the heads of the community had to sort of interpose and appeal to the rulers, so for for better treatment, or for fair treatment, or regardless if they had sums to taxes to be collected, etc. Lefichach higdim rashim, and for this reason Moses preceded put ahead the rashim, the heads, lizkenim, for the elders. So here we go. Right. Devechahai Gavna, okay, because in this particular case, the Vadai Harashim Kudmim, it would be clear that the heads would be the ones who would be ahead of the rest of the group. She'im ein Rashim mishtadlim lahashlim et hamedina. Okay, so what exactly this means? Interesting, because he says lashlim et hamedina, right? Because he says, as I understand the Hebrew here, because were the heads not able to, would not attempt to bring peace, to complete something, lashlim, the country, the state, the province, ein koach lachachamim lilmod Torah. There would be no power for the wise, for the sages, to study Torah. So it's interesting that whether he's talking in general about saying that there has to be a stable society, and that's what he seems to be saying. So so let me see, I'll keep going, but essentially he's saying that if the society isn't properly administered by the heads of the community, and there's no stable society, what learning is going to be going on? These people aren't going to have an opportunity to study Torah. So it's a foundation. So now we go on to a different issue altogether. Okay, maybe not altogether, but a different issue. Uma shehifsik bein rashim l'skenim bishvatim, and the fact that he puts in between rashim and skenim, the heads and the elders, this word shvatim. Milvad, he says, besides the yesh lomar, that one could say, in other words, over and above the argument that one could use, that one can say to hakavana, that the intention is rashe shivtechem, that what he even though it's saying rashim, let's see, let's go back and take a look at the actual Hebrew, right? Rashechem, shivtechem, ziknechem, right? Even though he doesn't say your, it says your heads, your tribes, etc. He means the heads of your tribes. In other words, Rashi Shiftechem, the heads of your tribes, which would certainly make sense, right? Just it's much clearer, right? And that's what he meant, right? And that it's simply, we'll see, Uchamo omrim emet b'makom imre emet. Right? Sorry, v'chamo amarim emet. So he's saying that there are times when Hebrew uses a syntax that's a little bit unusual, because normally you'd want to use a possessive case here, what's called smichut, right? In other words, there are other examples where it uses this particular form of the noun, right? And it says amarim, in other words, statements of truth, statements of, notice. So it should say imre emet, statements of truth. But it says statements, truth, not statements of. Amarim is not in a form of a Hebrew grammar where it says statements of. Okay, again, sometimes it'll say turim even, right? Rose stones, instead of ture even. So notice ture. That means rows of stones. So this is, so one can say that he's saying, that's a possible explanation, but there's something beyond that he wants to say. Ordinary, it seems also the Hashem Shvatim Shebekan, that in fact we have to understand this word Shvatim, which we normally understand as tribes, in other words, Shivtechem, your tribes, Shebekan, that is here, Hu Shem Nirdaf Im Rashim. In fact, it is associated, right? It's a word that is pursuant to the word Rashim. In other words, we still need to, not just in the smichut sense, but that the two of these words actually go together. Vahapirush, and the explanation of Shvatim here, Shvatim, Ksinim v'Rashim. So Ksinim are like captains and heads. So, and he gives an example of this word being used in that sense. Kamo v'kam shevet mi Yisrael, right? And a shevet, right? It's literally, it would mean a tribe arose in Israel. But the truth is, it has more to do with a leader. A leader arose in Israel, and this is in Parshat Balak. The Ikar Yesod HaMilah. And the reason he's saying this is because the basic meaning of this word, shevet, me'inyan sharbit, it's related to a word sharbit, which means a scepter, right? Hamemshalah, sharbit hamemshalah. And you know that a scepter represents power, authority, government. Kamo, as we see, v'chi yakeh ish et avdo b'shevet. Here we go. He uses this, right? And if a man beats his slave with a shevet, and here it means a rod, right? And he says tirgum onkelos, and there onkelos translates it as beshultana. Shultana. And interesting, shilton means, again, power. But apparently in Aramaic, it also means, in the sense, it possibly means a rod as well. Okay. And another verse from Proverbs, Chosech shivto, he who spares the rod, soneh bno, hates his child, ukedome, and similar kinds of examples. So the word shevet, even though we generally translate it as tribes, also has a meaning of authority, scepter, leader, etc., etc. So Rashechem Shiftechem, again, is a parallel to Rashim, heads. In other words, it means your administrators. And he's associating it in the same way. And then all that he said ahead as to why that would precede the elders applies. So that is it for us today. And I'll make a little mark here. We'll check this out, God willing, tomorrow. Actually, I think, yeah, here we are. So we're on to this for tomorrow. I'm going to stop the share. All right. Any thoughts, any comments? Was this understandable, etc.? Before I stop the recording. Yes. Harlan, did you want to say something?
Yeah, well, it looks like they go from the top, the elders, the leaders, and then the elders, and then it goes all the way down to the people of Israel itself. Right. When Moses was addressing them.
Right. So we can see we're sort of peeling the onion deeper. Rashi's approach is much more general, much more basic. This is already getting into specialty. I'm going to stop the recording. Thank you.